Have you ever watched a reviewer and wondered if they have a conflict of interest? Maybe something between expressing their honest opinion and being successful on YouTube. That's what this video is all about. I'm going to be fully transparent with you about my motivations and how I've made decisions to run this channel. In fact, we're even going to start with perhaps the most significant incentive of all, money. And I'm going to tell you about how I make money on this channel. I'll even tell you how much money I make. We're going to start off by talking about financial incentives and how they influence bias, and I am going to be very transparent with you. I'll tell you exactly how I make money, and I'll even tell you how much money I make. But for a topic such as this, which I find fascinating, to keep things focused so that I don't go for too long, I have prepared a chart for you. This first chart just outlines all the possible ways that a review channel like this one can make money. So it's organized by what you're selling and who's paying for it. So one can sell attention, they can sell board games, or they can sell another product. And the buyers are either the viewers, the publishers, or advertisers. So now I've filled out the chart with several different revenue models, except at the bottom. I don't want to get distracted by that. We'll come back to that later. So of these, the ones that I personally utilize are Patreon, affiliate links, and YouTube advertising. But the important thing for you, the viewer, is not how I've monetized my channel, but rather why I've chosen those options and how it affects my bias or the value of the reviews that I produce. If you want a minute to take a closer look at this chart, go ahead and pause the video because I'm about to change things. I'm going to change the names of all the columns from who's paying for these things to what these different parties can expect. And in the cells, I'm going to replace the revenue models with what a creator, such as myself, has to do in order to be successful. For me, the decision of which revenue model I use is based on how I want to create content. So for example, there is one thing that makes me very uncomfortable. I do not want to be accountable to a publisher for making very positive or enthusiastic content. I don't want them to have to pay me for content that is satisfying to them. The most important thing to me is to generate content that is satisfying to me and what I think is satisfying to share with other people. That's why, if we go back to that previous chart, things like paid promotions, sponsored content, and Kickstarter promos are things that I've completely rejected. I can even add to this chart the ways in which these behaviors can make a supposedly honest review a little bit more biased, and probably chief among those, and the one that influences me the most, has to do with viewer retention, because a YouTuber such as myself has access to all the analytics about how long people watch and when they start to drop off of a video, and just having that information creates patterns in how a YouTuber presents, and it becomes kind of habitual, even when they're not intending to be. It has a side effect that really kind of bugs me. I think it creates too much hype, because normally the way that you keep viewers watching is to increase energy and to get really positive, so people keep thinking that it's going to be really exciting and they won't turn away because, wow, this is so cool. Like, you do that to keep attention, and the side effect is you amplify the hype for a game when the game might not be deserving of the hype. Really, it's a tactic to keep attention. Anyway, I am guilty of this. I am certainly guilty of this. However, if we go back to this chart, there are some areas that I've highlighted in yellow because while I don't mind these things, they aren't a huge priority for me. For Patreon, while I don't mind putting a Patreon link in my description, I really don't want to do exclusive content. Like, in general, I just want to share board games and my opinions on board games with as many people as possible. So putting that behind a paywall, not so interesting. For me, it's like, if you want to support my content, you can support me on Patreon and you can participate in the Discord. I do have that. But I don't really want to do exclusive stuff. So again, yellow. And then for the affiliate links, same sort of thing. I don't mind putting an affiliate link in my description, but quite frankly, I don't want to try to sell board games. I'm not a salesman. I don't need to make money on affiliate links. In fact, the funny thing about the affiliate links, if you use that affiliate link to go to Amazon and then you decide you don't want to buy the board game, but you decide to buy spare batteries and socks instead, then because you used my link, I still get paid. So what I should be doing is I should say at the end of every video, if you like this video, use my affiliate link. I don't care if you buy the game. If you just buy something, it helps. But again, I don't like doing the cheesy stuff, and I don't like making direct requests for money. So in all of these areas, I really suck. How much do I suck? I said I would tell you how much money I make. So on Patreon, I make about $8 a month. On YouTube, depending on the month, especially before Christmas, things get kind of big. They can do well, but in general, I make between $60 and $120 a month. And then with affiliate links, I make about $20 a month. So altogether, I'm making like between $100 and $200 a month, which is not enough to pay the bills. I'm really not that big of a deal yet. However, that brings me to the section below, which I said I would get to. So this other product. For me, I don't have another product presently. I don't. But I do have a vision for another product, and that is my vision for the perfectboardgame.com. So what I'd like to do is tell you a little bit about that, because that's a really big part of my mission for Board Game Dad. So when I started this channel, I was frustrated because the games that I found on Board Game Geek, the way that they were ranked, did not apply to me. There were several games listed there that I was not very interested in. And I kind of felt like the whole system of rating the games was sort of broken. For me, the problem was, as a hobbyist, I wanted to use the site to find games that were interesting to me, not to the whole board game community, but to me. And Board Game Geek wasn't helping me do that. So I set up the perfectboardgame.com in order to use attributes so that games could be grouped and ranked according to shared characteristics. So the state of that app right now is a database of games that are mostly rated by me, although there are options now for users to add games and to even configure the attributes themselves. What I do believe is that if I make a valuable resource, the ways to monetize that, the path to monetize that will be made clear. So for right now, the thing that really motivates me is figuring out how to recommend games to people in a way that's meaningful and important to them so that they can find value on my web app. Because if my web app is valuable, then people will use it. And if people use it, then there might be potential for me to actually make a living doing this someday, which would be great. But right now there's no rush. Finally, while I've said I don't like to make asks of my audience, I think that now more than ever, it's appropriate for me to say that if the project at theperfectboardgame.com is something that you're interested in, you can help out or find more information by checking out the description or going to the website, checking the About tab, and seeing what steps you can take if you would like to contribute in whichever way is most interesting to you. But for now, let's move on. The next topic is how I select the games that I cover on this channel. There are a few ways in which coverage bias steals a bit of honesty from an honest review. Suppose, for example, instead of covering board games, I was covering restaurants, but on my channel, I only covered fancy restaurants. Well, obviously, I'm neglecting all of the restaurants that aren't classified as fancy restaurants. That's clear. But there's another way in which my channel is having bias as well. And that is, anytime I identify a restaurant that isn't isn't my favorite, or I find some flaws in a restaurant, it creates an exaggerated impression that that restaurant is bad, when in fact it's already a fancy restaurant. It's already a good restaurant, but because of the class that it's being compared in, the great fancy restaurants that aren't my favorite look like bad restaurants, when in fact they're still quite good and even fancy. We're going to turn to a chart. Now, I've prepared this chart. Each column is the 3 criteria that I use to select games for the channel, and each row above we have the pros and below the cons. For the first column, there's something you need to understand. This channel is called Board Game Dad. And true to the brand, I am a dad, a stay-at-home dad, in fact. I have 4 daughters who I homeschool. I don't have a lot of time. I used to have more time for games. These days, I only have time for the games that I really want to play. So if I'm going to review a game, or if I'm going to select a game to cover, I want to make sure that it's a game that I am excited enough about that I will make time to play it. If I'm not excited enough to make time to play it, then I'm not going to cover it. That means that this whole channel is very focused on my personal interests rather than trying to be like objective in my game selection. Now, I try to be objective in my review, but I'm very selective in the games that I cover. In fact, I have a list of different types of games that I don't cover. But in general, this channel is kind of fits the profile of my interests. I do believe that many of my viewers have their interests aligned with mine, and I think that's a really good thing. That means most of the time the games that I'm covering are games that you would be interested in as well. There's at least 2 reasons why this could be perceived as a bad thing. One, I'm not covering nearly as much of the board gaming hobby as some other channels cover. And secondly, because I'm intentionally selecting games that I believe will be good, in general, I don't have as many negative reviews as I think I might have if I was just covering everything that came my way. And I do think that it's important to juxtapose the positive reviews with the negative ones. Now, I do have several negative reviews if you're interested in watching those and seeing what it's like when I don't like a game. But usually those don't get as many views. It's the positive ones that stand out. Anyway, next category. For every game that I select, every game that I buy, and every game that gets sent to me by a publisher, if they're sending me a review copy, before I do it, I always read the rulebook first, and I judge the game according to the rulebook. I don't read other reviews. I don't watch other YouTube channels. I think that all of those would influence my opinion, and I want to judge the game for what the game is, not by what the community has said. I'm sometimes find games that other people aren't paying attention to, and it can be really nice to find a gem that missed other people's radar. There is a downside though. I do think that there is value in a channel with a host who is into what's hot right now, what's interesting, what's trending. I don't cover that material, but for people who are into that, there are other channels that do that. And in the third column, this one is not necessarily by design, just a side effect of how life can kind of get in the way. But like I mentioned earlier, I do receive review copies from publishers, and I want to insert a quick note here. Receiving review copies from publishers does not influence my take on a game as much as you might think. A lot of the publishers that I've spoken to, they're not looking for me to cover a game in a positive light. They simply want me to create content that is fair and honest. And as long as I'm fair and honest, many of them have explicitly told me they don't mind if it's a positive review or a negative one. They're just happy to get coverage for a game. So I do really appreciate that about the publishers that I work with. But going back to that, when I receive a free copy of a game from a publisher, I do feel more obligated to cover their game that they've given me, as opposed to a game that I just purchased on my own, for example. So there are some videos that I haven't made yet, simply because they are for games that I've invested in, I bought them, and I haven't finished getting through my checklist of games that publishers have sent me. And so that's sort of That's sort of, you know, I suppose in an ideal world, I would always cover exactly what I want to cover. Although there are a few good things about this. When I request these copies, sometimes I seek these publishers out, but what I really like is when the publisher finds me. There are game designers, publishers who are looking for a channel that will like the type of game that they've designed. And when they find me, they send me an email and they say, "We think you would love this." I love those emails because that really brings me in on something that I may not have found on my own. So I'm very thankful for designers and publishers that have reached out. I think that's awesome. But the bottom line here is that my channel is very much for a specific profile of board gamer, people who are kind of in line with my interests. However, for people who are not in line with my interests, the perfectboardgame.com is for everyone because it covers any profile of game. And I've spoken about that earlier. You can still check that out if you're interested. As for the games that I don't cover, the list includes card games, 2-player games, role-playing games, dungeon crawlers, legacy games, educational games if they're primarily focused on the educational aspect and less so on the gaminess. And then kids games and games with a take that mechanic, which I really hate. Generally, I don't cover anything on this list. However, there have been some exceptions. Last element is the video's format. And there are 4 gradients, we'll say, on how a video can be formatted that I think influences your perception of what that reviewer is communicating. 1, are they talking about whether or not a game is designed brilliantly, like in theory it's a brilliant game, or is it just plain fun? Because there are some silly games that are a lot of fun, that I would not call them great games, but I can't deny that they can be fun to play. Meanwhile, there are some games that require a genius to design, but either they're so dry or they take so much time that they're not a lot of fun. So even though I might get really excited, oh, it's so brilliant what they've done here, it might be a game that I never take out because it's hard to teach the rules or because it's not for everyone. So many numbers of reasons why a brilliant game might not be great or a fun game might be dumb. It's important to clarify these things in the review. And if it's not clear which you're talking about, then it's not clear on what you're supposed to take away from the video. Personally, I am bigger on the design quality of a game more so than whether or not a game is fun. That's sort of my tendency. I usually go more so in that direction. If a game is a lot of fun, but I don't think it's very innovative, then I normally point to its flaws, even if I think that it was enjoyable. The next is, does the review reflect popular opinion or individual opinion? And so what I mean by this is it reflective of what the board game community thinks about? What was the biggest, most exciting release at Essen this year? Or is it someone's unique little niche game that they found that they think is a real gem? I think there's actually value to both types of reviews. For me personally, I prefer to be over here. I love sharing games that no one's heard of before. That gives me a lot of joy. But you know what else? The games that everyone's talking about, they're really good for discoverability on YouTube. I mean, if I can still make a video about Catan, and just because it has Catan in the title, it'll get more views than my best review for one of my favorite little gems. Which, by the way, last year was called An Age Contrived. And no one watched that video, even though I think the game is brilliant. The next is your review describing a game that has lasting appeal, or is it the highlight of the season? Now, as the board game hobby grows and grows, I think we're seeing more and more games that are in and out for a season. And I think it's really hard to identify a game that's going to have lasting influence. That can be very, very challenging because normally there's a time crunch on how much time I have to receive a game, play a game, and then publish my review, right? if I if I keep a game for 5 years, and 5 years later I make a review, this game came out 5 years ago and I'm still playing it. It has lasting appeal. I mean, that's great, but it's going to be like old news. So we're kind of stuck in this like highlight of the season because that's the nature of reviewing. You're always reviewing what's new, and then you don't know if it's going to last or not. What I have done is this, though. I make this series of videos on the top 10 family board games. I do it every year, and I want to be clear. Only one of those videos is the top 10 family board games of all time. And I did it was one of my first videos, and I did it based on years of playing those games. And I really like the games that are on that list. They have lasting appeal. Every other game list that I've made, top 10 family games, is they're seasonal games, really. They're the games for the year. Now, because I've had the channel coming up on 5 years now, I'm looking forward to doing a brand new edition of top 10 family board games of all time. But that's the thing. It takes years before you can really make a verdict on whether it has lasting appeal. And the last one is very significant and personal to me. It is, when you review a game, are you talking about an objective measure for the game or how it feels to play it? The reason this is big for me is because before I reviewed games myself, I would watch reviewers and I would see them talking about how much fun something was. They'd say something like, "Oh, this one mechanic, it's so fun, and we played it and we were laughing and it was so fun. It felt great. What a cool thing." And they say that. They talk about how fun it was, but they don't have the vocabulary to say why it's fun. What is it adding to the game? And it would bug me because I would see games that were like, I'm thinking, that's not fun. I don't like that at all. Why did you say this was fun? I don't think it's fun. So why is that? This was what I was struggling with. And that's why I made the Perfect Boardgame and the attributes that I used, because it allows me to say this element of the game increases interaction, and the interaction is what's fun. Or this element is excellent for mitigating luck and kind of pushing it back over towards strategy so the game is not so luck-based, and I find it really innovative. And that's, I'll use this vocabulary as an example. So I have really tried to make it my mission to make reviews that are driven by objective measurement. This method of measuring games is also something I use to compare games, because you've probably seen on my channel I do a series called 5 games that are better than something else. And when I say that, I'm not just talking about my subjective experience playing the game, but rather I take the attributes of the game, like let's say, for example, in a recent one I did comparing to Monopoly, and I'll say, if you like this, or if this is a hit, but you don't like how the element of luck, we'll say, can dominate the outcome of the game, you might try a game like Machikoro 2, which has a little bit more strategy and a little bit more agency for players. Now, in this way, I'm comparing games that have similar qualities, and I can isolate one in order to make a comparison that might better appeal to somebody's perfect board game profile. And I think that's really, really important. Having a language to describe what is good or bad. And if you don't have that language, then you're over here with just describing what it feels like. So your homework has 2 parts. One is to try to identify these things in your favorite reviewers' channels. What is it that influences their bias? And the second thing is, share with me in the comments. Cheesy, right? No, but I want to know 2 things. One, what am I missing? What other elements of bias did I not isolate in this video? And 2, who's doing it really well? I think it should be celebrated. I think it should be shared. So if you've got a great channel that you want to recommend, please do share it in the comments. Though I might not do the best job at promoting myself, I want to make sure I do a great job of expressing my appreciation for those of you who are supporting me on Patreon. Even if the dollar amount isn't a lot, your continued support is immensely encouraging to me, and I want to say thank you.